This is the Senior Life Academy, located on the campus of the University Park United Methodist Church in Dallas, Texas. Welcome to you all. I'm Dee Dee Cassad, and today we have for our panel Diana Wilson, Bill Matthews, Stephen Fleming, and Miriam Mathis. We've chosen today the topic of humility. I would like for our audience to know that we try to choose a topic that can be used both biblically and practically. And humility is one of those. Does anybody have a definition for humility that we can start with? Do you have one, Miriam?
Well, I have a few words that the Hebrew used, and they said in this dictionary I looked in that the Hebrew has 4 or 5 words that could be translated into humility, but it has really not so much to do with how you conduct yourself as it does to the state you're in or what's been done, what's caused you to be in a state of humility. So the words are afflict, oppress, be abased, and be brought low. Those words.
Maybe it would help if we had both synonyms and antonyms. What's the opposite of humility?
Oh, I have some of those.
You have some of those?
Arrogance.
Pride,
Arrogance. That's
pride,
what I was. Pride.
And conceit.
Conceit.
Yeah, these are
Exactly.
words that sort of, I think we're more familiar with that side of it.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Right.
Well, and we know ourselves best by the negative, the things we get wrong, the things that we struggle with, like those things.
Well, and of course, the old joke is humility and how I achieved it.
Yes.
Yes.
Did you write that book?
No, but I practiced it a lot.
I think the word's origins actually in the way they've gotten into English also relate to the word human and humus
Yes.
and hubris because it has to do with being of the earth or and we're reminded of it on Ash Wednesday. Remember you are dust and to dust you shall return. It's all that. Remember who you are. You were made of the dust of the earth, and it's a reminder to us of how highly we should think of ourselves.
Well,
or
and
not.
if you look at it biblically, I think we consider humility as a characteristic of God. If we had to describe God, humility would be part of it. I mean, you don't ever see God as arrogant or proudful, do we?
Not really. I mean, what you do see is in the incarnation is God abasing himself to be a human baby and be born in a stable.
He
And
emptied himself. Yeah.
emptied
Like
himself.
us and
Yes, and that's part of you. God didn't plan for him to come, in royalty. And so when you look at that tells you an awful lot about God, much less the baby.
Well, and that wonderful story at the Last Supper when Jesus said, "Who do you say I am?" I think it's the Last Supper.
Yeah.
Who do you say I am? And anyhow, he gets to the point where he says, "Get behind me,
Oh.
Satan," because this person didn't want him to be lowly, humble. This person wanted him to
There's
be.
several places in the Last Supper, the washing of the feet. See, that's one of the most. How many people's feet have you washed? And I have seen our bishop wash feet. That's an experience to even watch. I mean, would you lower yourself to do that?
Well, I've been in churches where that was practiced as a ritual,
Yes.
and it
We did that
really
here as-
moving. One of the funny things that happened with that was the woman who was wearing pantyhose, and washing her feet through pantyhose was just sort of a filtered experience.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up.
Well, it was a startling kind of an experience when I was one of the ones washing feet.
Yes, yeah,
And,
it would, yeah.
I felt so humble
Yeah, and even more so.
and even more so.
The other part of the scripture of humility is when the two ask to be seated at the right hand of Jesus.
Right.
Now, and what did Jesus say?
Yeah.
It's not for me to give.
Not for me to do.
Yeah, but that's the arrogance that you mentioned.
That's right.
And often you're right. We see arrogance before we see humility. Moral.
It's just easier, you know, when you're working with the Enneagram, for instance, people complain because so much of that curriculum is around what we would call bad behavior. But it's so much easier for us to identify when we act poorly than when we're doing well.
Well, the other element in terms of just sociology is the leveling, the move toward leveling with other people. You know, you go into certain groups and you try to find who you are relative to who they are.
Right.
And, you know, I believe in name tags, and name tags are really great. And when you're in a strange context, especially, and some of the I've been to several political rallies in the recent days, and it's interesting because I recognize names of people who are pretty up there in terms of their position in political terms, county commissioners or city council members or the mayor. You know, been with them, and it's really interesting the feeling I have relative to the people whom I consider to be real leaders in the community, and yet in many cases they are humble too. You know, and it's the judge of the commissioners court, Craig Watkins, is just really a nice guy, and it's you know, he is there. And he has given himself, he has stood out for the immigrants. He stood out in some pretty ticklish situations and on the side that I think is right, which makes me proud that I know him, you know, not intimately by any means, but just to know a person who has shown the values that reflect what I feel like we ought to be reflecting in public life. So that's, you know, that's a humble servant. And Elba Garcia is another of the commissioners who's just been very open and forthright in standing up for the rights of people. Teresa Daniels, you know, these people are people who are servants of the public, and they see themselves that way. And I think we in the church tend to say, well, those are politicians. Well, but they're politicians who are putting their faith into practice, because I happen to know that Teresa Daniels sits in a very conservative congregation every Sunday, because she sits by the daughter of one of our residents, Julia Fowler. It's
So,
interesting how that connection got made. We had no idea.
How do you interpret then when Jesus says, "Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth"? Is meekness humility?
I think it's an element of it. I certainly do. Meek is not.
Meek is not weak.
It's not necessarily not weak at all. It's just it's a willingness to not put yourself forward first. And like Bill was intimating, you know, in the servanthood sense, what is the need here rather than what can I get out of this situation?
What's in it for me?
Right.
And I'm working for the community, and I'm a member of that community, trying to move the community forward. But it's not about me; it's about us. That's the message I get
It's
from
the
that.
we-ness.
The we-ness.
Really, that's one of the references I saw.
And I think, you know, all the talk in the gospel about Jesus being, you know, the suffering servant, we accent the suffering part, but he really was modeling being a servant all the time and helping people, whether he got any, he almost wanted to shy away from the approval of the masses sometimes. He would rather just do it.
I think he was concerned about that because he knew that that could turn into demagoguery and all
Right.
kinds of
Yeah.
bad things. He didn't step away from leadership, though.
No.
Yeah.
And that's the difficult balance, to be a servant
And
leader.
that's again what you were referring to.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, exactly that being a leader does not necessarily be you're not humble,
That's right.
or that you. To me,
But it's hard because
yeah, it is.
power is corrupting.
And power is corrupting, and in time it generally does. The higher they get, it appears often then it's more difficult to be what we would consider humble.
Well, but that's true for all of us. I don't,
Oh, absolutely.
yeah, I think I do best when I remember that I'm not in charge of the world and that God helps me in almost everything. And so if I can just pray about something and let it go and let God take care of it, it often comes out fine.
Absolutely. Well, to me, talking about meekness, to me, meekness is true meekness is power under full control. And I've seen people in committee meetings that there will be an awful lot of discussion all the way around the table, and then there's one person who hadn't said a word, and all of a sudden says something, and it solves the problem. It's an insight, and it's something that a person who's thoughtful and doesn't consider him or herself to be the center of attraction can often lead the entire group by the smallest thing. And to me, the washing of the feet's one of them. And I learned an awful lot about would I be the one to ask Jesus, could I sit next to you? I know, speaking to the bishop one time, he was saying something about, well, you're on my list or something, and I said, I don't mind being last. I just want to be on the list. See, and last is good enough if that's all it takes. I'm happy to be the last one. Just include me.
Well, I would rather be a doorkeeper in the house of God than dwell in the tents of the unrighteous.
Absolutely.
So it goes back way before Jesus. It's part of our heritage that goes deeply back into the scriptures.
How?
The other part of it is being humble doesn't mean you don't take initiative. And I think that's the meekness question. Meek, too often we hide behind that.
Well,
and we say, well, I'm meek. I don't have anything to say right now. But on the other hand,
but that's a facade often too.
it is too often it's a defense mechanism.
Yeah, exactly.
It's shedding or shirking really responsibility. When you see something that needs to be done or needs to be voiced, even in a context of a relationship, a group committee meeting, it's really incumbent on the humble person to take initiative to go ahead and be humble in a positive way.
Well, and to pray for discernment.
Sure.
Yes.
And to pray for courage.
Yeah, the word courage, that's interesting when you use it in the same sense as humility, because it probably takes some courage. It takes some courage oftentimes, for myself, I'll confess, to keep quiet. And when I really would like to say something, and either there's a little fear there of saying it, or I don't quite have the courage because it doesn't fit into what they're all thinking,
Well, isn't that where that discernment piece is? It's
yes,
because I've used this a whole lot in these discussions, that wonderful phrase we got from our capital campaign, Lord, what do you want to do through me? And trying to figure out what that is. And is this mine to do?
But it's Dee Dee's talking to putting the knowing together with the doing,
yes,
though.
exactly.
That takes another measure of something.
It
Yes.
does.
And And it is courageous
It is.
to be
It is
meek.
courageous.
Well, it is. That's what I'm saying. There's a time when you realize that, what is the most courageous thing to do? Is to say something or not to say something.
Well, if it puts you in a controversial situation where you're esteemed less in the eyes of others for saying what you say, even though you're convicted that it's the right thing to say.
And you and I have been there.
Well, for instance, if people are joking about something that's racial or sexual or something like that, to speak up and say, I don't really like having this kind of discussion, or I don't go along with you guys.
Or I don't
here.
think it's appropriate for us to talk about it.
Yeah.
Now, I've done that.
That takes courage, and you're not bragging on yourself, but that's a form of humility, because your colleagues are at least initially going to think less of you for that or something.
Because you're not going along with the crowd.
Exactly. It takes courage to be that way.
It does. There is a real need for courage at the right time. And
Jesus displayed it, I think, in the final hours of his life by not backing down from his mission.
Well, he kept quiet when they asked him.
But he didn't, he turned the other cheek when he was struck. And gosh, the story of his passion that week just continues to amaze and intrigue me.
It's incredible.
Someone could stay that true to his mission and not be aggressive in his behavior.
Well, or not defend himself, and say this is not, he could have talked his way out of it. He really could have talked his way out of it.
Well, and his response to Pilate was, "You said it."
Yeah, who do you say? Yeah, you said it. You said it. I didn't.
I think that was a great humorous twist, really.
Yes.
When you get down to it, that was turning away with a soft answer, because it also put it on the one who raised the question. It's that whole interdependence. That's a term I've learned to love, because we are so interdependent on each other. Our mutual fragility.
Right.
And our teamwork for mutual benefit. That's really what it's all about, and that's what the church is about. Is recognizing our fragility, our humility, but also recognizing that by working together toward common goals and coming to agreements in interdependence, then there's an answer that we can arrive at mutually together. And I pray for that.
Absolutely. When was the last time any of you heard a sermon on humility? Can you recall? To me, I thought of it myself before we did this, and I thought, I don't remember ever hearing one on humility. And yet I think it's key to our interrelationship, Bill, that you're talking about, and how we operate not only as a team, but in a committee, in a family situation.
I think it would be really powerful to have a powerful speaker talk about humility as not just another pretty little virtue,
Right.
Because that's kind of the reputation it has, if you will.
Yes.
It's a sweet little virtue, but it isn't. It's gritty. It's hard. It's
harder to be than you think.
Yeah.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think it's the fruit of the Spirit. I think if you can follow the model that Jesus gave us, what is that in Corinthians? The love passages,
Right.
being kind and loving and patient, and
Love is patient. Love
is
kind.
kind. And I think part of that is when we are that, then we are also humble. Because that being humble is part of patience, part of kindness. It's a piece of all those.
Thank you for watching. We appreciate it. We hope you would have enjoyed this. If you'd like to comment, our website's at the bottom of the screen, and we'd love to hear from you. In the meanwhile, may God surround you with His grace.